This controversial poison has been around since 1954. Its way of killing animals is by getting into their bodies and then causing the animal's vital organs to malfunction, leading to their death. 1080 has a negative and positive effect on the environment in New Zealand. 1080 kills pests in New Zealand when they consume the poison. These pests are targeted because they are predators of other animals that are native to New Zealand. 1080's negative effect is that it can be consumed by the wrong animals, including native ones, causing them to die when they are meant to be protected. A man who wanted to keep his name private, and here he is now. So what impact does 1080 have on native animals in New Zealand?
The overall impact of 1080 on animals in New Zealand is overwhelmingly positive. Although there are some effects on native animals, the positives far outweigh the negatives. We've seen an increase in a number of native birds, especially flightless birds, such as kiwi, as well as the alpine parrots, the kea, and a decrease in the number of predators for these animals.
And do you know why 1080 is used in New Zealand forests?
The great thing about New Zealand is it's largely unpopulated, so access to New Zealand's forests are highly restricted, preventing traditional methods of pest management from being successful. 1080 is great because it can be dropped from helicopters, allowing for a wider catchment of predators and a decrease in these pests.
And does 1080 leave harmful residue in the environment?
1080 has been seen to cause some deaths, but however, these small number of deaths from things such as livestock and native animals is far outweighed by the positive impacts it's had on the breeding programs of these native birds and wildlife. There has been no scientific evidence showing effects of 1080 in streams and rivers, and until that comes about, we'll keep using 1080.
Thank you very much. The second man I have interviewed is a farmer from Ashburton, and this is what he had to say on 1080. What are your thoughts about 1080 and the environment?
It's not really something I understand particularly well because it's not like in my backyard, so to speak. So, it's very easy to be flippant about something that doesn't affect you personally. But what my understanding is that it may have to be a necessary evil in the areas where it's used and causes the problems that environmentalists see because the alternative is not achievable, which is the deforestation and the wrecking of the environment by possums.
Do you think that 1080 should be continued to be put out in New Zealand forests?
Again, with a massive disclaimer, because it's not my backyard, my understanding is that yes, I believe it should be used until we find a viable alternative.
Thank you very much. Overall, from what we have heard from the two anonymous people I have interviewed over the past couple weeks, is that there are definitely positives and negatives to the poison 1080. Some of the positives discovered were definitely that 1080 is killing out pest species in New Zealand, how it can be dropped into remote areas that are inaccessible to hunters and trappers on four-wheel drives or by foot, meaning possums, stoats and other pests are able to breed and multiply without any stress. On the other hand, some negatives are that there is no cure to treat animals or even humans who have been poisoned by 1080. 1080 can also cause harm to native animals or animals that aren't meant to be targeted by 1080. If an animal dies from 1080 poison and another animal then eats the animal that was poisoned, it will proceed to receive the effects of the 1080, causing it to die. Thank you for listening to my podcast, where we dug a little deeper into the facts about 1080. I would also like to thank my guest speakers for their knowledge about the poison.
the 6th of February in 1840, Te Tiriti or Waitangi was famously signed by its British signatories and Māori chiefs in Waitangi. But now, in the year 2024, there is still much debate and even protests surrounding its signing. So why should this be? Well, I guess we'll be finding out now.
And you want to gut the treaty?
All people have the same rights and duties.
Because they're so motivated protesting, they can't even do their job. They don't want democracy, they want anarchy. They purport to represent Maori, even though the vast majority of Maori don't vote for them.
All people have the same rights and duties.
Particularly this one I'm tragically wrong.
We are in activation mode. Today, the revolution starts! It is time for our own parliament!
Te Tiriti or Waitangi, a document that is a hot topic with the current coalition government, just as it has been for decades. What makes it such a controversial document then? And why have people been protesting? And why is everyone accusing everyone else of racism? The latest controversy comes out of the ACT Party's bill to define the principles of the treaty, which was recently called a novel interpretation by the Waitangi Tribunal, who are usually responsible for interpreting the treaty's principles. ACT's bill has been met with debate and even protests around the country, and accusations of racism and ill intent are flying around in every direction. But how can this be? The ACT interpretation of the treaty sounds very reasonable on the surface. In short, all New Zealanders have the same rights and duties regardless of their race, and are all governed by the New Zealand government, which is made up of elected representatives regardless of their race. To find out more about the nuances of this topic, I first interviewed Dr. Hana O'Regan, a member of the Waitangi Tribunal and an advocate for Indigenous rights for Māori in New Zealand. I first asked her about why she was so passionate about what she does.
So it is probably no surprise that my journey has been significantly influenced by those around me and the experiences I've had. We've got this legacy of people where injustice has been experienced, that really a sense of commitment to do better.
I also interviewed the head of Department for History at Christ's College, Miss Stevenson, who speaks about her experience with learning about Te Tiriti or Waitangi.
So when I was in school, we didn't learn it, to be fair. You know, we did the one day a year at the start of February where we would have a lesson on Te Tiriti, and that was about it. So my knowledge, awareness, interest in learning about it came far more from actually becoming a history teacher than anything in the development of the Aotearoa Histories curriculum.
With two interviewees who are very learned in the history and modern application of Te Tiriti, I began asking some tough questions about the treaty. First, I asked them both about ACT's interpretation of the treaty, whether or not it was true to the principles of the treaty, and why the Waitangi Tribunal called it a novel interpretation.
So I think my real concern is that the thinking, the basis of the thinking is around an attempt to delegitimise the indigeneity or the rights of Indigenous people, and also to minimise the position and the certainty or the security of those rights that were guaranteed to the Tiriti, in Te Tiriti, to Māori and te iwi. And I think, I thought we were bigger than that.
I think there's 2 points to hit there about that. One of those is the interpretation that the Treaty of Waitangi was to set up an equal government to serve both peoples. That is true, but that's not the end of the sentence in a way. It's a simplified understanding, I believe. So the Treaty of Waitangi was also set up to allow a settler government that would offer protection, and it promised to look after and include and protect Māori. But it also promised to protect all of Māoridom. It was their worldview, it was their culture, their spirituality, their traditions, their tikanga. That was also supposed to be protected, not just allowed or acknowledged, but it was supposed to be something that was really protected.
According to these experts, the Principles Bill is missing half of the story when it comes to the original treaty and the way it was understood by the chiefs who signed it, and also how the treaty should give active protection to the Māori population's culture, property and rights. Furthermore, what is lacking from the Principles Bill is any reference to the idea of land preemption and how that part of the treaty had been breached for over a century. With this in mind, I asked a difficult question. If Te Tiriti was a document that included so much disagreement and confusion, why is it so important that we interpret the document properly? The Waitangi Tribunal ruled that the Māori chiefs didn't have enough understanding of Western power structures and could not have ceded governorship. How do we interpret a document with such contradiction and confusion around its signing?
You commit to those things. It's not necessarily that you say, right, that happened 140 years ago, 200 years ago, so that's it now, it's forgotten. Where it has never waned. It has never waned in the views of Māori in terms of its importance as a foundational document of this country. It's been at the forefront of Māori protests, but also Māori debates and discussions with the Crown around our relationship and what it means to be here in New Zealand, in this part of the world, and how we define ourselves.
So it is really messy, and so to manage those translations, it's really hard to know what to do. Do you keep it? Do you keep one side of it? Or, which is what we mentioned in our practice the other day, was this concept of if this is the marriage or the joining of two peoples and one partner has been continually neglected, mistreated, abused, and marginalised, if that repeated abuse happened in a marriage, then divorce would be an option on the table. So is there actually a conversation to be had about divorcing the treaty? I don't know.
It should be pretty clear that the treaty is a document that must be interpreted and followed accurately, as it is the very document that allowed the British to settle in these lands, often being considered a founding document for New Zealand. The controversial nature of this document seems to be an inherent eventuality due to the ambiguous and contested meanings and motives of Te Tiriti and its signatories. This concludes the investigation into Te Tiriti or Waitangi, having come to the rather predictable conclusion that Te Tiriti is just about as important as it was in 1840, but most importantly that it is just as complicated as it is important, and therefore warrants such controversy and debate.
Kia ora and welcome to Newsroom Productions. Over the past few weeks, top news correspondent Angus Cotchin has been investigating the topic of All Blacks playing overseas in the off-season instead of playing Super Rugby. He managed to obtain exclusive interviews with ex-All Blacks, Sam Cane, Brad Weber and Dan Carter, who all have experience playing overseas as well as playing in New Zealand. Here's what I found. When Sam Cane was asked how he thinks this would impact Super Rugby if they were allowed, this is what he had to say.
Yeah, so I think without a doubt it would affect Super Rugby, but it would ultimately come down to how many players are playing offshore. Players who have international experience and have been around a while know like that they have a certain level of professionalism to have played that long, and it's a pretty important role for young guys to come into the team to see every day what's required to get the most out of your body week in, week out.
Sam also highlighted an important rule about the limits of foreign players clubs are allowed.
So if we take Japan, for example, each Japanese team can only have 3 players playing for them who are internationally capped, who have represented their country.
He also talked about who they would allow to play if they did open this up.
Well, they'd only really be able to open it up to people who have, say, maybe had 60 or 70 test matches, for example, or played over 8 years of rugby in New Zealand, something like that. But if you look at a player like Geordie Barrett, Rico, Ioane, I think they debuted as 19 and 19 and 20-year-olds for the All Blacks. So, and those players often set the example and set the standards around what's required at Super Rugby level.
Sam also touched on the decline in Super Rugby popularity.
From a fan's perspective, like the game is struggling a little bit. I think crowds have picked up a little bit this year, but the game is struggling a little bit to get people engaged. And if you take out like a couple of the best players from each Super Rugby team, I think that'll only make it worse.
We interviewed ex-All Black Brad Weber about how he thinks it would impact Super Rugby if All Blacks stopped playing. He also highlighted some important player restrictions rules regarding France.
I used to be firmly in the camp of not letting All Blacks, not allowing people to be selected for the All Blacks while playing overseas. And I'm probably still mostly in that camp. However, since I've come over here and sort of realised how it all works, I'm kind of less against it. Because every league in the world has limits on how many foreigners you can have in each team. So, like, for example, in France, you can only have, across the whole season, I think it's an average of 7 foreigners in your match day 23 across the whole season. And in Japan, I think it's like 4 foreigners in each team. So there's actually not that many spots up for grabs in each team, and especially those 2 leagues. And then like England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland is even, I think it's even less, or there's like more sort of hoops to jump through.
We also asked Brad about the financial differences between New Zealand and France.
Well, for some guys, yeah, it is incredibly significant. But a lot, certainly for guys sort of in my position, a lot of it's guaranteed money. So yeah, like I've signed my contract, I know exactly what I'm going to be paid each month. And depending on how I go, or if I, because I can't make the All Blacks anymore, so I know I'm getting paid from one employer, and that's it. I know exactly what I'm getting for the whole year. Whereas in NZ, contracts can be often tiered dependent on how many games you play for the All Blacks, and ultimately, a lot of it is dependent on how much you play for the All Blacks, because you get paid more when you're in camp. So yeah, you'll sign your contract with New Zealand Rugby, but you don't actually know how much you're going to get paid exactly because of all the bonuses that you could get or you might miss out on, depending on how you go each year. So it's a little bit of a juggling act as to whether you stay in NZ, give it a crack, and try and earn all your bonuses, or come to France and have it guaranteed.
We asked Sam Cane the main reason for him going to play in Japan. This is what he said.
I'd say the main reason would be, better financially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New Zealand Rugby did not get back to us regarding our calls for an interview. However, we managed to obtain an exclusive interview with ex-All Black Dan Carter. This is word for word about what he had to say. For me, players should not play overseas in the off-season, as they need to recover unless they have a sabbatical clause in their contract, which means they will miss Super Rugby, then that's okay. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my piece. This is Angus Cotching from the Newsroom, signing off.
Hi, I'm Tom Richmond from the Cross College Newsroom. Today you will hear some interviews from former All Blacks, Sam Cane and Brad Weber, who are playing in Japan and France, so you can hear some of their thoughts on playing rugby overseas.
How many players do you think would play overseas if New Zealand rugby allowed it?
It's almost impossible to guess because, so if we take Japan for example, each Japanese team can only have 3 players playing for them who are internationally capped, who have represented their country. And obviously these Japanese teams can choose from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Argentina, like people all over the world. So it's not like there's an unlimited number of contracts.
How do you think it would impact Super Rugby if they allowed this?
I think it would impact it. I think if New Zealand Rugby was to open it up, I think they'd only open it up to people who say maybe had 60 or 70 test matches, for example, or played over 8 years of rugby in New Zealand, something like that. If you look at a player like Geordie Barrett, Rico Ioane, I think they debuted as 19 and 20-year-olds for the All Blacks. So like they've been playing in New Zealand rugby, Test rugby and Super Rugby for a number of years.
Do you enjoy playing in Japan like more than New Zealand?
It's just different. Like I debuted for the Chiefs as a 19-year-old, so I've been playing for the Chiefs for 13 or 13 years I think. So but don't get me wrong, I still playing for the Chiefs, and like just coming to a different country and a different team, different environment just opens your eyes up to what's out there. You only know what you know from the environments you've been in. So coming over here, even just the challenge of living in a new country with a different language, like it's tough. It's just a good experience, I think.
When did you start playing rugby and how would you encourage people to play?
I started playing rugby when I was 5. My dad took me down to my local rugby club, and I was lucky that he was one of my coaches as well. And how I'd encourage people to start playing would be just the fun that you have with your mates. I think you can get that playing any sport, to be fair. Any team sports, the friendships you make, but like awesome just like life skills and things you learn from being part of a team, for showing up for training every week, the enjoyment you get from doing awesome stuff on the field with your mates. Yeah, I think it's just a fantastic sport with like great values.
Now we interview Brad Weber. This is what he had to say. Do you enjoy playing rugby in France more than playing Super Rugby in New Zealand?
It has its pros and cons. I'd say on the actual rugby itself, I much prefer playing Super Rugby. Just the speed of play, the higher skill sets, more running, more exciting play. And it obviously suits my style of play as well. So I much prefer playing rugby in NZ. I mean, the rugby over here in France is very physical. Defences are really good. There's a lot of kicking.
What is your main reason for playing in France?
My main reason for playing in France is, well, ultimately they offered me a 3-year deal of guaranteed money compared to New Zealand, who offered me 2 years. With, depending on how much rugby I played for the All Blacks was going to determine my sort of level. So, it was a bit of a no-brainer. And then when I sort of stepped back and thought about it, like it was between there and Japan, and France is probably the top 14, and the European Champions Cup is probably the best domestic comp.
Is there a significant pay difference in France, and is it worth it?
The difference is, well, for some guys, yeah, it is incredibly significant. But a lot, certainly for guys sort of in my position, a lot of it's guaranteed money. So yeah, like I've signed my contract, I know exactly what I'm going to be paid each month, and depending on how I go, or if I, because I can't make the All Blacks anymore, so I know I'm getting paid from one employer, and that's it. I know exactly what I'm getting for the whole year. Whereas in NZ, contracts can be often tiered dependent on how many games you play for the All Blacks, and ultimately, a lot of it is dependent on how much you play for the All Blacks, because you get paid more when you're in camp. So yeah, you'll sign your contract with New Zealand Rugby, but you don't actually know how much you're going to get paid exactly because of all the bonuses that you could get or you might miss out on.
This was Tom Richmond from the Newsroom, and thank you very much for listening.